The taxi pulled away from number 4, Privet Drive, at 6:30 on a Tuesday evening, leaving Harry Potter standing on the pavement with his trunk and Hedwig's cage. The driver hadn't helped with the luggage. Vernon had paid from the doorway and retreated immediately inside. Harry dragged his trunk up the drive. The wheels caught on a crack in the concrete, the same crack that had been there since he was 7. Hedwig shifted in her cage, talons clicking against the perch. The sound seemed loud in the quiet street, where sprinklers whispered over identical lawns and the smell of someone's barbecue drifted between houses. The front door was unlocked. Harry left his trunk in the hallway, carried Hedwig upstairs to the second bedroom. His bedroom, though it still felt strange to think of it that way, and set her cage by the window. She ruffled her feathers and turned her back to him, still annoyed about the taxi ride. "I know," Harry said quietly. "Me too." Downstairs, because television was on in the living room. Vernon's voice rumbled something indistinct. Dudley's laugh-track response. Harry stood at the top of the stairs, his hand on the banister, and waited. For shouting about the trunk left in the hallway, for complaints about owl feathers or magic, or the mere fact of Harry's existence. Nothing came. He went down slowly. Vernon sat in his armchair with the evening paper held up like a barrier. Dudley sprawled on the sofa, watching a game show. Neither looked at Harry. Petunia moved in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of plates and cutlery being arranged for dinner. Harry crossed the hallway to the cupboard under the stairs. His cupboard. Old instinct pulled him there. The need to check, to know for certain. The door was closed but not latched. He could see the gap, a thin line of darkness where the door didn't quite meet the frame. He stood very still, looking at that gap. Every summer for as long as he could remember, the first sound after arriving home had been the click of that lock. Vernon's thick fingers on the bolt, the metal sliding home, the small, satisfied grunt that meant Harry was properly contained. Then the trunk would be shoved in, and the door would close, and Harry would spend the first night back, breathing stale air and cataloguing what had changed in the tiny space during his absence. But the lock was undone. The door hung loose on its hinges. Harry glanced toward the living room. Vernon's newspaper didn't move. He reached out and pulled the cupboard door open fully. The hinges creaked, that same high protest they'd always made. Inside, the space looked smaller than he remembered. His old blanket was still there, folded in a corner. The spiders had been busy, webs draped across the underside of the stairs. There was his first broken toy soldier, the one Dudley had stepped on. A smell of dust and something older, something that belonged to the house itself. He closed the door carefully, leaving it unlatched, and went to the kitchen doorway. Petunia stood at the counter, slicing a cucumber with mechanical precision. She wore her usual summer dress, pale yellow, with an apron tied precisely at her waist. Her blonde hair was pulled back. She didn't turn around. "Dinner's at 7, she said. Her voice was level, empty of inflection. "Wash your hands." Harry waited for more, for the list of chores, the inventory of rules, the reminder that he was to stay out of sight and make no noise and cause no trouble. His aunt's thin shoulders remained turned away from him, her knife moving in steady rhythm against the cutting board. "Yes, Aunt Petunia," he said finally. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink, the water running cold, then lukewarm. Through the window, He could see the garden, Petunia's roses in rigid formation, the lawn mowed to perfect uniformity, the fence that separated their house from the neighbours. Mrs. Number 5 was taken in washing. She waved. Harry didn't wave back. Dinner was chicken and potatoes, and the cucumber Petunia had sliced. Vernon ate with his usual single-minded focus, cutting his meat into identical squares. Dudley pushed peas around his plate, glancing at the television in the other room. Petunia served everyone with the same portions she always did, her movements efficient and practiced. Harry ate slowly, waiting. The silence at the table felt different from Hogwarts silence. At Hogwarts, silence in the Great Hall meant hundreds of students eating, the ambient noise of cutlery and quiet conversations, the sense of people choosing not to speak in that particular moment. Here, silence meant the absence of permission to speak. It meant everyone pretending the same thing at the same time. "More potatoes," Vernon said, pushing his plate toward Petunia. She rose and brought the serving dish. He loaded his plate without thanking her. Harry's own plate was nearly empty. He'd eaten everything without thinking, the portions exactly what Petunia always gave him, slightly less than Dudley, more than nothing, standard, expected. Dudley finished and left for the living room without asking to be excused. Vernon followed a few minutes later, his chair scraping against the linoleum. Harry began gathering the plates. "Leave those," Petunia said. Harry stopped, a plate in each hand. His aunt stood at the sink with her back to him, her spine very straight. "Go upstairs," she said. "I'll call you if there are chores." Harry set the plates down carefully and left the kitchen. In the hallway, he paused by the cupboard door. Still unlatched, still slightly open. He could push it closed properly, lock it himself even, establish the familiar boundary. He didn't touch it. Upstairs, his bedroom felt too large. He'd only had it for 2 years, since the Hogwarts letters started coming, addressed to the second bedroom, and it still belonged more to Dudley's broken toys and unwanted furniture than to Harry. The bed was a proper bed, not a cot. The window opened. There was a desk where he could do homework if he wanted, though he never wanted. Hedwig clicked her beak as Harry entered. He let her out of the cage, and she flew to the windowsill, ruffling her feathers into place. "I don't know either," Harry told her. He lay down on top of the bed covers, still dressed, and stared at the ceiling. There was a water stain in the corner, shaped like a teacup. He'd mapped every inch of this ceiling last summer, cataloguing the cracks in the plaster the way he used to catalogue the spiders in the cupboard. The house settled around him. Vernon's cough from downstairs, the television laugh track, water running in pipes, Petunia's footsteps crossing the kitchen, then the back door opening and closing. She'd be checking her roses, the evening inspection she performed every night during summer. Harry got up and went to his trunk. He pulled out his school things, robes, books, the photograph album Hagrid had given him. He set them on the desk, arranging them in a row. Evidence that Hogwarts was real, that he'd been gone, that he had somewhere else to belong, even if he couldn't be there now. His mother looked out at him from one of the photographs, waving. His father's arm was around her shoulders. They looked happy. They looked like they'd never heard of Privet Drive. A soft knock at the door startled him. Before he could respond, the door opened a crack. Petunia stood in the hallway, her hand on the door frame. She didn't enter. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then her gaze moved past him to the desk, to the photographs. Her face did something complicated. Not quite pain, not quite anger. Something between recognition and refusal. "Don't leave those out," she said quietly. Then she turned and went back downstairs. Harry put the album in the desk drawer and pushed it closed. That night, he lay awake listening to the house. Dudley's snoring through the wall. Vernon's heavier breathing from the master bedroom. The refrigerator humming downstairs. The creak of old wood settling. At 11:30, he got up and went to the hallway, moved quietly to the stairs, stood at the top landing in the darkness, looking down at the cupboard door. It was still open, a thin vertical line of lesser darkness against the wall. He went down 3 steps, 4. The stair that always creaked. He skipped it. At the bottom, he stood in front of the cupboard, his hand hovering over the door handle. He pulled it open fully. The smell of the cupboard washed over him, dust and old wood and the particular mustiness of a space too small and too enclosed. His blanket was still there in the corner, exactly where it had always been. His aunt hadn't removed it. Harry reached in and touched the wall where he used to sleep, his fingers finding the marks he'd scratched there when he was younger. Tiny lines counting days until his birthday, until Christmas, until anything that meant time was moving. He pulled his hand back, closed the door, left it unlatched. In the morning, he came downstairs expecting it to be locked, expecting the whole night before to have been some strange dream, some trick he'd played on himself. The door hung open. Petunia stood in the kitchen, making toast. She didn't turn around when Harry entered. "There's orange juice," she said. "Use a glass from the cupboard." Harry poured himself juice, sat at the table, waited for something to happen, some acknowledgement, some explanation, some return to the normal cruelty he understood. Vernon came down in his work clothes, knotting his tie. He grunted at Petunia, accepted his coffee, drank it, standing by the counter. His eyes passed over Harry once, briefly, then away. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, set it in the sink. "Working late tonight," he said to Petunia. "Don't wait dinner." "Yes, Vernon." He left. The front door closed. His car started in the driveway, then pulled away. Dudley appeared, still in his pajamas, and took a piece of toast from the toaster. He glanced at Harry, then away, took his toast to the living room. Petunia served Harry 2 pieces of toast with butter. Not 1 piece, 2. She set the plate in front of him without comment, then went back to the counter and began wiping it down with a cloth, her movements methodical and precise. Harry ate his toast. It tasted like toast. The butter was real butter, not margarine. The kitchen smelled like morning, coffee and bread, and the faint chemical scent of Petunia's cleaning products. When he finished, he put his plate in the sink. Petunia was still wiping the counter, the same spot, over and over. "Aunt Petunia," Harry said. His voice came out smaller than he'd intended. "The cupboard door." She stopped wiping, didn't turn around. "There's weeding needs doing in the garden," she said. "You can start after breakfast." Harry waited. His aunt's shoulders were rigid, her hand frozen on the counter with the cloth still pressed against the surface. "Yes, Aunt Petunia," he said finally. He went outside into the garden, into the clean morning air that smelled of cut grass and roses, knelt by the flower beds and began pulling weeds, his hands working mechanically, while his mind circled around the unlocked door, the extra toast, the silence that felt nothing like the silence before. Behind him, through the kitchen window, he could feel his aunt watching. When he glanced back, she was standing there, motionless, the cloth still in her hand, watching him, her face pale in the morning light, her expression something he had no name for. Harry turned back to the weeds and kept working, the sun warm on his neck, the earth cool beneath his fingers, the whole strange summer stretching out ahead of him like a held breath. The weeding took 3 days. Petunia inspected Harry's work each evening, walking the perimeter of the flower beds with her arms folded, her mouth pressed into a thin line. She found fault with his technique. He pulled too hard, damaged the roots of the good plants, left soil scattered on the grass. But her corrections were quiet, almost absent. She would point at a spot and say, "That needs redoing," then walk back inside. Harry redid the spots, worked more carefully, learned to tell the difference between what belonged and what didn't by the way Petunia had arranged everything. Roses in rigid lines, petunias in perfect spacing, even the ground cover distributed with geometric precision. Anything that disrupted the pattern was a weed. On the 4th morning, Petunia made breakfast while Harry sat at the kitchen table, toast again and orange juice. The radio played low on the counter, some program about gardening that Petunia half listened to while she worked. Outside, Mr. Number 7 was washing his car. The sound of the hose and his whistling drifted through the open window. Petunia set Harry's plate in front of him, 2 pieces of toast, same as always. She turned back to the counter, then paused, reached for the frying pan where she'd cooked Vernon's breakfast. There were 2 sausages left, cooling in the grease. Her hand hovered over them. Harry watched her thin fingers, the veins visible beneath pale skin, the wedding ring catching morning light. She picked up one sausage with the spatula, held it suspended for a moment, then placed it on Harry's plate. She did this without looking at him, without saying anything. Just set the sausage down next to his toast and returned to wiping the counter. Harry stared at the sausage. It sat there, ordinary and impossible. An extra sausage. Food he hadn't asked for, hadn't earned, hadn't stolen, just given. He waited for her to take it back, to remember herself, remember the rules, remember that Harry didn't get extras. Dudley got extras. Vernon got extras. Harry got enough to stop him being hungry, enough that the school couldn't complain, enough to keep him functional. Petunia kept wiping the counter. The radio announcer discussed Rose's blight. Mr. Number 7's whistling continued outside. Harry picked up his fork and cut into the sausage. It was slightly cold, the fat congealing white around the edges. He ate it slowly, each bite deliberate, waiting for the moment when his aunt would turn around and demand to know what he thought he was doing. She didn't turn around. He finished the sausage, ate his toast, drank his orange juice, put his plate in the sink, and went outside to finish the weeding, the taste of breakfast strange in his mouth. The next morning, there were 3 sausages on his plate. The morning after that, Petunia served him eggs. Harry stopped trusting the food. He ate it, he was hungry, and it was there, and refusing it seemed more dangerous than accepting it. But he checked each bite, looked for something wrong, some poison or trick or punishment hidden in the normal appearance of breakfast. The eggs were just eggs. The toast was just toast. The orange juice tasted like orange juice. Dudley noticed on the 5th day. He came down to breakfast in his dressing gown, his hair sticking up, and stopped in the doorway when he saw Harry's plate. Harry had been served first for once. Petunia had put eggs and bacon and toast in front of him before Dudley even entered the room. Dudley stared, his mouth opened slightly. He looked at his mother, then at Harry, then at the plate. "Mum," he said. His voice had a whining quality, the beginning of a complaint. Petunia turned from the stove with Dudley's plate, set it in front of him. It had more than Harry's. It always had more than Harry's. But the difference was smaller than usual. Not the mountain of food Dudley normally received, just more. "Eat your breakfast," Petunia said. Dudley sat down heavily. He cut into his eggs with unnecessary force, his knife scraping against the plate. Glanced at Harry again. Harry kept his eyes on his own food, eating steadily, trying to be invisible. They ate in silence until Vernon came downstairs. He took his seat at the head of the table, accepted the coffee Petunia handed him, and unfolded his newspaper. The paper made a sharp crackling sound in the quiet kitchen. "Boy," Vernon said, not lowering the paper. "Weeding finished?" "Yes, Uncle Vernon." "Gutters need cleaning. You'll do that today." "Yes, Uncle Vernon." The newspaper stayed up. Vernon drank his coffee behind it, a barrier between himself and the rest of the table. Harry finished his breakfast and took his plate to the sink. When he turned back, he caught Dudley watching him with an expression Harry couldn't read. Not quite resentful, not quite curious. Something uncertain, like Dudley was waiting to see what would happen next. Nothing happened next. Harry went outside to clean the gutters. Petunia gave him the ladder and gloves and a bucket. The work was hot and dirty, and the gutters were full of decomposing leaves and bird nests, and things Harry tried not to look at too closely. He worked methodically, moving the ladder along the side of the house, scooping debris into the bucket. From his position on the ladder, he could see into neighboring gardens. Mrs. Number 5 was hanging washing. Mr. Number 7 was trimming his hedge with electric clippers. Everything looked normal, orderly, the same as it always looked. At noon, Petunia brought him a glass of water. She set it on the garden table without comment, then went back inside. Harry climbed down and drank it. The water was cold, with ice cubes floating in it. She'd added ice cubes. He went back to the gutters, finished the front of the house, moved the ladder to the side. Above him, clouds moved across a pale sky. An airplane passed, silent and distant. Harry's arms ached from reaching, and his hands were filthy despite the gloves. When he climbed down for the last time, Dudley was in the garden. He stood near the back door, holding a football, not bouncing it or playing with it, just holding it. "Mum says, lunch is ready," Dudley said. Harry started putting the ladder away. Dudley didn't move. "You're not doing magic, are you?" Dudley asked suddenly, making her act weird. Harry stopped, looked at his cousin. Dudley's face was flushed, his expression defensive. Scared, maybe. "No," Harry said. "I'm not allowed to do magic outside of school." "Then why is she being nice to you?" Harry didn't have an answer. Dudley shifted his weight, the football squeezed between his hands. "It's weird," Dudley said. "She's being weird." He turned and went inside, leaving Harry standing by the ladder in the garden, the question hanging in the air. Lunch was sandwiches. Petunia had made 4, 2 for Dudley, 1 for herself, 1 for Harry. She'd cut them in triangles and arranged them on plates with crisps and sliced apple. Harry's sandwich had the same filling as Dudley's, ham and cheese and tomato. Not different, not less, the same. They ate in the kitchen. Petunia stood at the counter, eating her own sandwich in small bites, looking out the window at the garden. Dudley ate quickly, not meeting anyone's eyes. Harry ate carefully, aware of every sound he made, the crunch of crisps, the rustle of the napkin, his own breathing. When Dudley finished, he pushed back from the table and stood up. His plate still had one sandwich left. He looked at it, looked at Harry. His hand moved toward the plate, then stopped. "I'm full," Dudley said to no one in particular. He left his plate on the table and walked out. Harry heard him going upstairs, the familiar heavy tread on the steps. Petunia turned from the window. She looked at Dudley's abandoned plate, at the uneaten sandwich. Her jaw tightened. She crossed to the table and picked up the plate, carried it to the counter, stood there with it, not moving. Harry waited. His own plate was empty. He should take it to the sink. He should leave the kitchen. He should do something other than sit there watching his aunt's rigid back. Petunia set Dudley's plate down, picked up the sandwich. For a moment, Harry thought she was going to throw it away. She hated waste, hated disorder, hated anything that disrupted her careful household systems. She turned and put the sandwich on Harry's plate. Harry stared at it, at the triangle of bread and filling, slightly compressed from Dudley's plate, at his aunt's hand withdrawing, her thin fingers curling into a fist. "Don't waste food," she said. Her voice was sharp, clipped, almost angry. She left the kitchen. Harry heard her footsteps going upstairs, the bedroom door closing. He looked down at the sandwich, picked it up. It was just a sandwich, bread and ham and cheese and tomato, the edges starting to curl slightly. He bit into it, chewed, swallowed. It tasted like the first sandwich had tasted. Normal. But Dudley had left it there, had walked away from it and said he was full. Dudley was never full. Dudley never left food on his plate. Dudley took food from other people's plates. Harry ate the sandwich, slowly, alone in the kitchen, the house silent around him. That evening, Vernon came home late. His car pulled into the drive at 8:30, the headlights sweeping across the front windows. Harry was in his room, reading one of his school books. He'd started reviewing potions notes, though he wouldn't admit to himself that he missed Hogwarts, missed having something to do that mattered. Downstairs, he heard the front door open and close, Vernon's heavy footsteps in the hallway, Petunia's voice, too quiet to make out words. Then Vernon's voice, louder. "I don't want to discuss it." A pause. Petunia said something. Vernon responded, his words clipped and hard. Harry closed his book and went to his door, opening it a crack. "Your decision," Vernon was saying. "Your house during the day, but I won't have changes. I won't have disruption. Things are fine as they are." "Vernon," Petunia's voice was strained. "No." Vernon's footsteps moved toward the living room. "I don't want to hear it, Pet. Not about this. Not about him." The living room door closed. Harry heard the television come on, loud enough to fill the house. He closed his bedroom door quietly and sat on his bed, his potions book forgotten beside him. Later, after Dudley had gone to bed and the house had settled into its nighttime configuration, Harry heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft footsteps, measured and careful. They stopped outside his door. He waited, barely breathing. The footsteps moved on, went downstairs. He heard the cupboard under the stairs open, the creak of those familiar hinges. A long silence, then the cupboard closing again, and the footsteps returning upstairs. Harry got up and opened his door. The hallway was empty. Petunia's bedroom door was closed, a line of light visible underneath. He could hear Vernon snoring from inside. He went downstairs in the darkness, avoiding the creaking step, stood in front of the cupboard door. It was still unlatched, still hanging slightly open. He pulled it open and looked inside. The blanket was gone. His aunt had taken it. The space looked emptier without it, more obviously a cupboard, less obviously a place where someone had lived. Harry closed the door, left it unlatched, went back upstairs to his too large bedroom, and lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling's water stain, trying to understand what was happening, and failing. In the morning, there were eggs and bacon and toast on his plate. Petunia served him without speaking, without looking at him. Vernon read his paper. Dudley ate in silence. The extra food kept coming. Harry kept eating it. The cupboard door stayed open, and no one said anything at all. The second week passed in a pattern of careful distances. Harry cleaned the garage, reorganized the shed, washed the windows. Petunia assigned chores each morning in the same flat voice, and Harry completed them without question. The extra food continued appearing on his plate. Vernon retreated further into his newspaper and his evening programs. Dudley stayed in his room more, emerging only for meals and occasional trips to the television. No one mentioned any of it. On Wednesday morning, Harry came downstairs to find Petunia standing in the hallway, perfectly still. She wasn't doing anything, not cleaning, not organizing, not moving toward any task, just standing there near the coat closet, her hand resting on the wall. Harry stopped on the bottom step. His aunt didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him. Her fingers pressed against the wallpaper, tracing something Harry couldn't see. He waited. The house was quiet. Vernon had already left for work. Dudley was still asleep. Just Harry and his aunt in the silent hallway, morning light coming through the frosted glass of the front door. Petunia's hand dropped. She turned, and for a moment, her face was completely unguarded. She looked lost. Then she saw Harry, and her expression closed like a door slamming. Shut. "Breakfast," she said, and walked past him into the kitchen. Harry stayed on the stairs for a moment longer, looking at the spot where she'd been standing. The wallpaper there was cream with tiny blue flowers, the same wallpaper that covered all the downstairs hallways. Nothing special about it, nothing to see. He went into the kitchen. Petunia stood at the stove with her back to him, scrambling eggs. Her shoulders were rigid, her movements more forceful than usual. The spatula scraped against the pan. "Toast is ready," she said without turning. "Pour your juice." Harry did as he was told. Sat at the table. The radio was off this morning. The only sounds were the sizzle of eggs and the distant hum of a lawnmower from several houses away. Petunia served him eggs and bacon and toast, set the plate down with a sharp click. Harry looked at her face as she did it, tried to see some explanation there, some clue to what was happening. But his aunt's expression was perfectly blank, her eyes focused somewhere past Harry's shoulder. "Thank you, Aunt Petunia," he said. She flinched, actually flinched, like he'd said something terrible. Then she turned back to the stove and began washing the pan, her hands rough with the scrubbing brush. Harry ate his breakfast alone at the table, watching his aunt's back. She washed the pan long after it was clean, her hands moving in the same circular motion, over and over. The water ran. The lawnmower droned on in the distance. After breakfast, Harry went to dust the sitting room, a task Petunia had assigned him the day before. It was a room they rarely used, kept pristine for the occasional visitor Vernon wanted to impress. The furniture was stiff and uncomfortable. The photographs on the mantel showed Dudley at various ages, all in matching frames. Dudley as a baby, Dudley at his first school, Dudley receiving some award Harry didn't recognize. No photographs of Harry. He hadn't expected any. He was dusting the bookshelf. Books on ever read, arranged by height and color. When Petunia entered, she stopped in the doorway, looked around the room as if checking his work, then moved to the mantel. She adjusted one of Dudley's photographs, tilting it a fraction of an inch. "The skirting boards need doing," she said. "Use the small brush. Don't miss the corners." Harry got the brush from the cleaning cupboard and knelt by the skirting boards. They were already clean. Petunia cleaned this room religiously, even though no one used it. But he brushed them anyway, working his way around the perimeter of the room. Petunia stayed. She moved about with no apparent purpose, straightening things that were already straight, checking surfaces for dust that wasn't there. Harry could feel her presence behind him, moving from the mantel to the window to the bookshelf. He worked his way along the wall toward the door. The skirting board there had a crack in it, a split in the wood that had been painted over, but was still visible. Harry brushed around it carefully. "Stop," Petunia said suddenly. Harry stopped. His aunt's voice had sounded strange, tight, like something pulled too taut. He turned. Petunia stood by the bookshelf, one hand pressed flat against it. She was looking at the crack in the skirting board. Her face had gone very pale. "That's been there for years," she said. Not to Harry, to herself, or to the room, or to someone who wasn't there. Harry waited. His aunt kept staring at the crack, her hand still pressed against the bookshelf, like she needed it to stay upright. "She did that," Petunia said. Her voice was barely audible. "Running in the house. I told her not to run in the house, but she never listened. Hit it with her school bag, laughed about it." Harry's breath caught. She. His aunt had said, she. Petunia blinked, seemed to remember where she was, who was there. Her hand dropped from the bookshelf, and her expression shuttered. "Continue," she said, and left the room. Harry stared at the crack in the skirting board. His mother had done that. His mother had run in this house, had carried a school bag, had laughed. Here, in this house, in this room. He reached out and touched the crack gently. The wood was old, the paint smooth over the split. How old had she been? 7? 10? Running through the house, being told off by Petunia, laughing anyway. Harry finished the skirting board slowly, his mind full of a red-haired girl running through these rooms, making marks Petunia had never repaired. That afternoon, he was pulling weeds again. They grew back quickly in the summer heat. When he noticed his aunt in the kitchen window, she stood there for a long time, unmoving, watching him. When he glanced up, she didn't look away, just stood there, her face pale against the darkness of the kitchen beyond. Harry bent back to his work, unsettled. The sun was hot on his neck. His hands were dirty, the soil dark under his fingernails. He pulled another weed, shook the soil from its roots, added it to the pile. When he looked up again, his aunt was gone. The next morning, Harry woke early. Something had disturbed his sleep. A sound, maybe, or just the strange quality of the silence. He lay in bed, listening to the house. Nothing. Just the usual creaks and settles of old wood. He got up and went to the window. The street outside was empty, the sky pale with early morning. Mr. Number 7's newspaper lay on his doorstep. A cat walked along the fence across the street, tail high. Harry turned from the window and started to dress, then stopped. There was a sound downstairs. Soft, careful. Someone moving quietly, trying not to wake anyone. He opened his door and went to the landing, looked down into the hallway. Petunia stood there, still in her dressing gown, her hair unpinned. She was holding something small. Harry couldn't see what. She stood very still, looking down at whatever was in her hands, her shoulders curved inward. Harry stayed frozen on the landing. His aunt hadn't noticed him. She was completely absorbed in whatever she held, her face illuminated by the morning light, coming through the front door's frosted glass. Then she looked up, saw Harry. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Petunia's hands closed around whatever she was holding, hiding it. She turned and walked quickly down the hallway toward the kitchen, her dressing gown swirling behind her. Harry came downstairs slowly. The hallway was empty now, but something felt different, disturbed, like his aunt had left something of herself behind in the air. He went to the kitchen doorway. Petunia stood at the counter with her back to him, her hands busy with the kettle. Whatever she'd been holding was gone, tucked away somewhere Harry couldn't see. "You're up early," she said. Her voice was carefully neutral. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded, not turning around. "Breakfast in 20 minutes. Go wash." Harry went back upstairs and washed, changed into proper clothes. When he came back down, Petunia had dressed too. Her hair was pinned up. Her apron was tied. The kitchen looked exactly as it always did, everything in its place. But Harry couldn't stop thinking about his aunt standing in the hallway, holding something small and precious in the pale morning light. 3 days later, he was cleaning the upstairs hallway, another task Petunia had assigned without explanation, when he noticed the small table by the linen cupboard. It held a vase of flowers, always, and a dish for Vernon's spare change. Nothing else. Except now, tucked behind the vase, was a small frame. Harry could see just the edge of it, the corner of dark wood. He looked toward the stairs. Empty. He could hear Petunia downstairs in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of her afternoon routine. Dudley was in his room, the thump of bass from his stereo vibrating through the walls. Harry reached behind the vase and pulled out the frame. It was a photograph. 2 girls, maybe 9 and 11, standing in a garden. The older girl had her arm around the younger one's shoulders. Both had reddish hair. The older girl's darker, almost auburn. The younger girl's bright red, catching the sunlight. They were smiling. The older girl's smile was tight, proper. The younger girl's smile was wide and genuine, her eyes squinted against the sun. Harry's hands shook. He knew that younger girl. He'd seen her in other photographs, in the album Hagrid had given him. His mother, Lily. The older girl was Petunia, his aunt. Younger than Harry had ever imagined her, without the pinched expression she always wore now. Her arm around his mother's shoulders, both of them smiling. Behind them, in the photograph, Harry could see a house. This house. Number 4, Privet Drive. The garden looked different, less regimented, more natural, but it was definitely this house. His mother and Petunia had stood together in this garden, in front of this house. Footsteps on the stairs. Harry's heart jumped. He started to put the photograph back, but he wasn't fast enough. Petunia appeared at the top of the stairs and stopped. She stared at Harry, at the frame in his hands, her face drained of color. "Put that back," she said. Her voice was very quiet. Harry set the frame down carefully on the table, stepped back. His aunt came forward slowly, picked up the photograph. She held it with both hands, like it might break. Harry started. "I know what you are doing." Petunia looked down at the photograph, her jaw tight. "Always looking where you shouldn't. Just like—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. Her fingers were white where they gripped the frame. "Just like what?" Harry asked softly. His aunt's eyes were wet. She blinked hard, forcing the wetness back, looked at him directly for the first time in days. "Go downstairs," she said. "Aunt Petunia. Downstairs. Now." Harry went. Behind him, he heard his aunt moving in the hallway. Not leaving, just standing, there. He paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back up. Petunia stood at the landing, still holding the photograph. She was touching the glass with one finger, tracing something. A face, maybe. Her face, or his mother's. Harry couldn't tell from this distance. Then she turned away, and Harry heard a drawer opening, the photograph being put away, the drawer closing. He went to the kitchen and sat at the table, his heart still racing. His hands were shaking. He'd seen his mother and his aunt together, as children, here, in this house. That night, Vernon worked late again. Dudley ate dinner in front of the television. Harry sat at the kitchen table with Petunia, the two of them eating in silence. His aunt's face was carefully blank, but there were shadows under her eyes. Harry wanted to ask about the photograph, about his mother, about when they were young and stood together in the garden. But his aunt's expression forbade questions. Her silence was absolute. After dinner, Harry went upstairs, paused outside his aunt and uncle's bedroom. The door was slightly open. He could see inside, just a sliver of the room, the neat bed, the dresser, and on the dresser, half hidden behind Vernon's cologne bottles, the photograph. His aunt had moved it, not hidden it away, moved it somewhere she could see it. Harry went to his own room and closed the door, lay on his bed and thought about two girls standing in the sunlight, arms around each other, smiling, before everything went wrong, before magic and jealousy and whatever else had broken them apart. His aunt had kept the photograph, all these years, hidden but kept. Harry stared at the water stain on his ceiling and tried to imagine what it meant that his aunt still looked at her sister's face in the pale morning light when she thought no one was watching. The third week of summer settled into a rhythm that felt more unsettling than any routine Harry had known at Privet Drive. Petunia continued adding food to his plate, never with explanation, never with eye contact. Vernon retreated further into silence, his newspaper held higher, his evenings spent in his shed or locked in his study. Dudley watched everything with wary confusion, eating his meals quickly and disappearing back to his room. The photograph stayed on Petunia's dresser. Harry knew because he'd walked past the open bedroom door twice more and seen it there, half hidden but present. His aunt never mentioned catching him with it, never acknowledged it at all. On Tuesday evening, Petunia made shepherd's pie for dinner. She served it at 6 o'clock precisely, as she always did, portioning it onto plates with mechanical efficiency. Vernon's plate received the largest helping. Dudley's came next, mounded high. Harry's portion was smaller, but not minimal, enough to be a proper dinner, not the careful rationing of previous summers. They ate. Vernon chewed steadily, his eyes on the television, visible through the open doorway to the living room. The news was on, the announcer's voice droning about politics and weather. Dudley pushed his food around, eating without enthusiasm. Harry ate carefully, aware of every movement he made. When the main course was finished, Petunia cleared the plates. She returned from the kitchen with dessert, chocolate pudding in glass bowls, topped with cream. Vernon's bowl was largest, Dudley's only slightly smaller, and Harry's bowl was the same size as Dudley's. Vernon noticed first. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked at the bowls, at his wife, his mustache twitching. Petunia set Dudley's bowl down with a sharp click, then Harry's. She didn't meet Vernon's eyes. Vernon's chair scraped back. He stood, napkin still tucked into his collar, his face reddening. "Pet," he said. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of control that meant he was furious. A word, kitchen. Petunia's hands tightened on the serving tray. She followed Vernon out without looking, back. The kitchen door closed but didn't latch. Harry could hear their voices, not words, just the rise and fall of Vernon's anger and Petunia's quiet responses. Dudley stared at his pudding bowl, at Harry's, back to his own. His spoon hovered over the dessert, but he didn't eat, just sat there, listening to his parents argue in the next room. Harry didn't touch his pudding either. The chocolate looked rich and dark, the cream perfectly dolloped on top, exactly like Dudley's, the same, equal. The kitchen door opened. Vernon came out, his face still red, his jaw clenched so tight Harry could see the muscles jumping. He sat back down heavily, picked up his spoon, and began eating his pudding with aggressive precision. Petunia followed, a moment later. She sat in her usual seat, but didn't take her own dessert. Just sat there with her hands folded in her lap, her face pale and composed. No one spoke. Vernon finished his pudding quickly, stood, and left for the living room. The television volume increased. The news gave way to some program about antiques, the cheerful voices of the presenters filling the house. Dudley looked at his mother, then at Harry, then down at his bowl. He picked up his spoon. Harry picked up his spoon too. The pudding was good, rich and sweet, the cream cutting the chocolate's intensity. He ate slowly, trying to be quiet, trying to be invisible. Across from him, Dudley ate 3 bites and stopped, set his spoon down, pushed his chair back slightly. Harry kept eating, tried not to watch his cousin, not to acknowledge the strange energy in the room. Petunia sat motionless at the head of the table, her hands still folded, her eyes fixed on something in the middle distance. Dudley picked up his spoon again, put it down. His bowl was still more than half full. He'd barely touched it. "Mum," Dudley said quietly. Petunia didn't respond, didn't even blink. Dudley's hands fidgeted with his napkin. He looked at Harry's bowl, nearly empty now. Then at his own, his face did something complicated. Not quite the tantrum expression Harry knew well. Something else, something uncertain. Dudley stood up, picked up his bowl. For a moment, Harry thought he was going to take it to the kitchen, throw the rest away, storm off to his room. Instead, Dudley walked around the table and set his bowl down next to Harry's. The room went very still. Petunia's head turned sharply toward her son. Harry's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. "I'm full," Dudley said. His voice was too loud, defensive. "I don't want it." He turned and walked quickly out of the room. His footsteps thundered up the stairs. His bedroom door slammed. Harry stared at the bowl Dudley had left, at the chocolate pudding with its cream topping, mostly untouched, at his own nearly empty bowl beside it. Petunia made a sound, small, choked, barely audible. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor, and left the room. Harry heard her, footsteps going upstairs, quick and light, then the master bedroom door closing. In the living room, Vernon's program continued. Cheerful voices discussed the value of Victorian candlesticks. Harry sat alone at the table, staring at Dudley's abandoned dessert. His cousin had never, in all the years Harry had known him, left food on his plate, had never said he was full, had certainly never given anything to Harry without being forced. The pudding sat there, chocolate and cream, still perfectly good, just sitting there. Harry didn't touch it. He picked up both bowls, his empty one and Dudley's full one, and carried them to the kitchen, set them carefully in the sink, looked at the stairs, where somewhere above his aunt had closed herself in her room, and his cousin had done the same. The house felt strange, pressurized, like everyone was holding their breath at once. Harry went upstairs quietly, avoiding the creaking step. The hallway was silent. Light showed under Dudley's door, and Harry could hear music playing. Some pop station Dudley liked. From the master bedroom, nothing. Just silence. Harry went to his own room and sat on his bed. Hedwig hooted softly from her cage. He let her out, and she flew to the windowsill, ruffling her feathers. "I don't know either," Harry told her quietly. He lay back on the bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Dudley had given him food. His cousin, who hoarded everything, who took things from Harry just for the pleasure of taking them, had walked across the room and set his dessert down next to Harry's bowl. And Petunia had looked like something was breaking inside her. Harry didn't sleep well that night. He lay awake listening to the house settle, to the familiar creaks and groans of old wood and old pipes. Around midnight, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful footsteps. They paused outside his door, then moved on. He heard them going downstairs. He got up and opened his door a crack. Petunia stood at the bottom of the stairs, silhouetted against the faint light from the street lamp outside. She was in her dressing gown, her hair unpinned. She stood there for a long moment, then moved toward the kitchen. Harry waited, heard cabinet doors opening and closing, the refrigerator opening, the soft clink of dishes, then silence. He crept to the top of the stairs and looked down. His aunt had come back into the hallway. She stood in front of the cupboard under the stairs, one hand on the door. The door was open. It had stayed open all these weeks, unlatched, hanging slightly ajar. Petunia pulled it fully open and looked inside, just stood there, looking at the small dark space. Her shoulders were shaking. Harry stepped back from the landing, his heart pounding. He went back to his room and closed the door silently, stood there in the darkness, listening. After a few minutes, he heard his aunt's footsteps coming back upstairs, passing his door, going to the master bedroom, the door closing. Harry didn't go back to bed. He sat at his window, watching the empty street, watching the night sky lighten slowly toward dawn. In the morning, no one mentioned dinner. Vernon left early for work without eating breakfast. Petunia made toast and eggs, her movements mechanical, her face carefully blank. She served Harry without speaking, then left the kitchen. Dudley came down late, when Harry was finishing his breakfast. He stood in the doorway, looking at the table, at his mother's bag where she stood at the sink. "Mum," he said. Petunia didn't turn around. "Your breakfast is ready. Sit." Dudley sat. His plate held eggs and bacon and toast, less than usual, but still more than Harry's. He picked up his fork, put it down, looked at Harry. Harry kept his eyes on his own plate, finished his last bite of toast, stood to take his plate to the sink. "Harry," Dudley said. It was the first time Dudley had said his name in months, maybe years. Harry stopped, the plate in his hands. Dudley's face was red. His hands were clenched on the table. He looked like he was trying to spit out something that tasted bad. "I didn't." He stopped, started again. "Last night, I wasn't. Dudley," Petunia said sharply, "eat your breakfast." But Dudley kept looking at Harry, his expression miserable and confused and angry all at once. "Nothing happened last night," Harry said quietly. "You were full, that's all." Something in Dudley's face eased slightly. He nodded once, quickly, and looked down at his plate, picked up his fork, started eating. Harry took his plate to the sink. Petunia stood aside to let him pass, still not looking at either of them. Harry washed his plate carefully, dried it, put it away in the cabinet. When he turned back, his aunt was standing very close, her hand gripping the edge of the counter. "The windows need washing," she said. "Outside. Start with the front of the house." "Yes, Aunt Petunia." He went to get the supplies from the garage. When he came back through the kitchen, Dudley was still eating, slowly now, while Petunia stood at the window looking out at the garden. Harry spent the morning washing windows. The work was tedious and hot. The sun beat down on the front of the house, and the cleaning solution dripped down his arms. He worked methodically, starting with the upstairs windows and moving down. From his position on the ladder, he could see into the neighbors' houses. Mrs. Number 5 was vacuuming. Mr. Number 7 was reading a newspaper in his conservatory. Everything looked normal, ordinary, the same as it always looked. But it didn't feel the same. Around noon, Petunia brought him a sandwich and a glass of water. She set them on the front step without speaking, then went back inside. Harry climbed down and ate, sitting on the step in the sunshine. The sandwich was ham and cheese. The bread was fresh. There were crisps, too, in a small bowl she'd brought out. He finished eating and went back to the windows. The afternoon stretched out hot and slow. He moved the ladder to the side of the house, washed those windows, moved it to the back. From the back of the house, he could see into the kitchen. Petunia was there, standing at the counter. She wasn't doing anything, not cooking, not cleaning, just standing. Her head was bowed, her hands flat on the counter surface. Harry looked away quickly, focused on the window in front of him, rubbing at a stubborn spot until the glass squeaked clean. When he finished and came inside, the house was quiet. Dudley's music played faintly from upstairs. Petunia was in the living room, dusting furniture that was already clean. Harry put the cleaning supplies away and went upstairs to wash. That evening, Vernon came home at his usual time. Dinner was ready. roast chicken and vegetables. They sat at the table in silence. Vernon carved the chicken with sharp, precise movements. Petunia served the vegetables. Harry and Dudley ate without speaking. When the plates were cleared, Petunia brought dessert again. Apple crumble with custard. She served Vernon first, then Dudley, then Harry. The portions were almost equal, Dudley's slightly larger, but not by much. Vernon's newspaper rustled sharply. He didn't look up. Dudley stared at his bowl, at Harry's bowl. His spoon clinked against the dish as he picked it up. They ate dessert in absolute silence. The only sounds were spoons against bowls, Vernon's paper turning pages, the distant sound of traffic from the main road. Dudley finished first. He stood with his empty bowl and took it to the kitchen. Came back, stood by his chair, his hands fidgeting. "May I be excused?" he asked. His voice was quiet, formal. Petunia nodded without looking at him. Dudley left quickly, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Vernon finished his dessert, folded his paper with crisp precision, stood. "I'll be in my study," he said to Petunia. "Don't disturb me." He left. Study door closed. Harry heard the lock click. Petunia sat at the table, her own dessert untouched in front of her. Harry finished his crumble, the sweet apples and buttery topping suddenly tasteless in his mouth. He stood to clear his bowl. "Leave it," Petunia said. Her voice was rough, like she'd been crying, though her face was dry. Harry set the bowl down. "Aunt Petunia, go upstairs. I just wanted to. Upstairs, now." Harry went, paused at the top of the stairs and looked back. His aunt sat alone at the table, surrounded by empty chairs, her hands folded in front of her untouched dessert. Her head was bowed, her shoulders curved inward. She looked very small, very alone. Harry went to his room and closed the door, lay on his bed and listened to the house. Vernon's voice in his study, talking on the phone about sales figures and quarterly reports. Dudley's music from across the hall. And beneath it all, the silence from downstairs where his aunt sat alone in the dining room. Later, much later, Harry heard her footsteps coming upstairs. They paused on the landing, moved to Dudley's door. He heard his aunt knock softly, heard the door open. "Dudley," Petunia said. Her voice was muffled through the walls. "We need to talk." Harry couldn't hear Dudley's response. The door closed. Voices murmured, too quiet to make out words. After several minutes, the door opened again. Petunia's footsteps went to the master bedroom. The door closed. Harry stared at the ceiling. The water stain looked like a teacup, like a cloud, like nothing at all. He thought about Dudley's bowl being pushed across the table, about Petunia standing in front of the open cupboard, her shoulders shaking, about Vernon locked in his study, refusing to be disturbed, about a family that was breaking apart in slow motion, and Harry in the middle of it, still not understanding why. He fell asleep eventually, the summer night warm and still around him, the house silent except for its usual creaks and settles. And in the morning, when he came downstairs for breakfast, the cupboard door was still open, still unlatched, still waiting. For what? Harry didn't know. The fourth week of summer began with rain. Not the dramatic thunderstorms Harry sometimes watched from his window, but steady drizzle that turned the sky grey and made the pavements slick. Vernon complained about it over breakfast, his newspaper rustling with irritation. Dudley stayed in his room. Petunia moved through the house silently, cleaning things that were already clean. Harry spent the rainy days reading in his room, listening to the water tap against the window. Hedwig sat on her perch, dozing. The house felt smaller in the rain, the walls closer, everyone compressed into their separate spaces. On the third day, the rain stopped. Harry woke to sunlight streaming through his window and the smell of damp earth. When he came downstairs, Petunia was already in the kitchen, dressed in her gardening clothes, old trousers and a faded blouse Harry had never seen her wear inside the house. "The garden needs attention," she said without preamble. "The rain will have brought the weeds up. You'll help me today." It wasn't a question. Harry nodded. After breakfast, they went outside together. The grass was wet, the soil dark and soft. Petunia's roses had shed petals during the rain, pink and white scattered across the flower beds like confetti. She surveyed the damage with her lips pressed thin, then handed Harry a trowel and a bucket. "Start with the border by the fence," she said. "Pull anything that doesn't belong." They worked in silence. Petunia knelt by her roses, deadheading the spent blooms with small scissors, her movements precise and economical. Harry worked along the fence line, pulling weeds that had sprung up thick and green after the rain. The soil was easier to work wet. The roots came up cleanly, with minimal resistance. The sun climbed higher. The dampness began to steam off the grass. Mrs. Number 5 appeared in her own garden, calling a greeting over the fence. Petunia straightened, brushed soil from her hands, and walked over. "Dreadful rain, wasn't it?" Mrs. Number 5 said cheerfully. "My petunias are absolutely sodden." "Yes," Petunia said, "quite dreadful." "Is that your nephew helping? How nice to see young people taking an interest in gardening." Petunia's back stiffened slightly. "He's earning his keep." "Oh, well, we all must do that, mustn't we?" Mrs. Number 5 laughed. "My grandson won't touch the garden. Too busy with his computer games. You're lucky to have help." Petunia made a non-committal sound. Mrs. Number 5 continued talking. About her petunias, about the weather forecast, about some scandal involving the people at Number 8. Petunia stood with her arms crossed, her responses minimal and clipped. When Mrs. Number 5 finally went back inside, Petunia returned to her roses. But something in her posture had changed. Her shoulders were more rigid, her movements sharper. She cut the dead blooms with unnecessary force. Harry kept working, the bucket filled with weeds. The sun grew hotter. His shirt stuck to his back with sweat. Around midday, Petunia stood. "That's enough for now," she said. "Come inside. Lunch." They left the tools by the back door and went to wash their hands at the kitchen sink. Petunia scrubbed her nails with a small brush, getting every trace of soil out. Harry washed his own hands thoroughly, aware of his aunt beside him, the smell of earth and green things clinging to both of them. Lunch was sandwiches and lemonade. Petunia had made the lemonade fresh. Harry could see the lemons she'd squeezed, the rinds still on the counter. They ate at the kitchen table. The back door opened to let the breeze through. "This afternoon," Petunia said, "we'll do the beds along the house. They'll need fresh mulch after the rain." Harry nodded, his mouth full of sandwich. Petunia looked at him, directly for the first time that day. Her expression was unreadable. Not quite studying him, not quite avoiding him. Something between. "You'll need to learn to do this properly," she said. "A garden requires consistent attention. Neglect it, and it runs wild." Harry swallowed. "Yes, Aunt Petunia." She turned away, looking out the window at her precisely arranged flower beds, her roses in their strict rows, her lawn cut to perfect uniformity. "Your mother," she said suddenly, then stopped. Her hand tightened on her glass of lemonade. "Your mother never cared about gardens. She was always running off somewhere, never stayed still long enough to see anything grow." Harry's heart jumped into his throat. He stayed very still, afraid that any movement would break whatever had loosened in his aunt's usual rigid control. But Petunia's mouth pressed closed again. She stood, taking her plate to the sink. "Finish your lunch. We'll start again in 20 minutes. The afternoon was hotter. They worked side by side along the flower beds. Petunia showing Harry how to spread the mulch evenly, how to keep it away from the stems of the plants. Her instructions were curt but clear. She corrected him when he did it wrong, demonstrated the proper technique without impatience. Harry found himself paying careful attention, not just to avoid doing it incorrectly, but because his aunt's hands moved with unexpected grace. Her thin fingers spread the mulch precisely, creating neat borders, maintaining the exact distances between plants. There was something almost meditative in the way she worked. "Why roses?" Harry asked without thinking. Petunia's hands stilled. She didn't look at him. "They require discipline, proper care. They don't thrive through neglect." She said it like it meant something more than gardening. Harry worked quietly, spreading mulch, trying to match his aunt's precision. They worked until the sun began lowering toward the roofline. The garden smelled of damp earth and roses and fresh mulch. Petunia stood and surveyed their work, brushing soil from her knees. "Better," she said. "Not good, just better." They carried the empty mulch bags to the garage, put the tools away. Petunia took off her gardening gloves and hung them on their designated hook. Everything had a place. Everything returned to that place when finished. "Go wash," she said. "Dinner at 6. Harry went upstairs and showered, scrubbing the soil and sweat away. When he came back down, Petunia had already changed from her gardening clothes. She stood at the stove, cooking. The kitchen smelled of chicken and herbs. Dudley appeared at dinner time, pale and quiet. Vernon came home precisely at 6. They ate roast chicken and potatoes, the meal passing in familiar silence. Vernon asked Dudley about his plans for the weekend. Dudley mumbled something about meeting friends. Vernon grunted approval. No one asked Harry anything. After dinner, Harry offered to help with the dishes. Petunia looked at him sharply, as if checking for sarcasm, then nodded. They worked side by side at the sink, Petunia washing, Harry drying. The rhythm was comfortable in a strange way, familiar, like something they'd done before, though they hadn't. When the dishes were finished and put away, Petunia dried her hands carefully on a tea towel. She looked out the window at the garden, at the work they'd done that day. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll trim the hedges. They've grown unruly." "Yes, Aunt Petunia." She nodded once and left the kitchen. Harry heard her going upstairs, her footsteps soft on the carpet. The next day was Sunday. Vernon played golf. Dudley slept late. Petunia and Harry went back to the garden. The trimming took hours. Petunia was exacting about the hedge line. It had to be perfectly level, perfectly straight. She used a string guide and a spirit level, checking and rechecking. Harry held the string taut while she trimmed, his arms aching from keeping it steady. The sun moved across the sky. The hedge slowly took shape, transformed from something shaggy and imprecise into something geometric and controlled. Sweat dripped down Harry's back. His shoulders burned from holding the string. "There," Petunia said finally. She stood back and examined the hedge from multiple angles, checking the line. "That will do." They cleaned up the clippings, bagged them, carried them to the curb for collection. The work was hot and tedious. By the time they finished, it was nearly evening. The light had turned golden, the air slightly cooler. Petunia went to check her roses, her evening inspection, the same one she performed every night. Harry started to go inside, then stopped. His aunt stood by the rose bed with her back to him, her hand resting on one of the blooms. He watched her for a moment. The way she touched the petals gently, carefully, the way her shoulders curved slightly inward. She looked smaller out here, less rigid, almost vulnerable. "Aunt Petunia," Harry said quietly. She didn't turn around. "What?" "The garden. It's really nice." Her hand dropped from the rose. She stood very still for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "It is." She turned and walked past him into the house without looking at him. Harry stayed in the garden as the light faded, watching the shadows lengthen across the perfectly trimmed hedges, the precisely arranged flowers, the lawn cut to absolute uniformity. His aunt's garden, a place where everything had its proper place and stayed there, where nothing was allowed to grow wild. Harry looked up at the house. Light showed in the kitchen window. He could see his aunt moving inside, her silhouette passing back and forth, preparing dinner, maintaining her routines, keeping everything in order. He went inside and washed his hands at the kitchen sink. Petunia stood at the stove, stirring something. She didn't acknowledge him. "Set the table," she said. Harry set the table. 4 places, the cutlery aligned precisely, the napkins folded. Dudley came down for dinner. Vernon returned from golf in a good mood, talking about his game. They ate together, the normal dinner routine, everything exactly as it should be. But when Harry looked at his aunt across the table, her face composed and expressionless, he thought about her hands on the rose petals, about the way she'd said, "Your mother never cared about gardens," like it was both criticism and grief. About the photograph she kept on her dresser of 2 girls standing in front of this house, arms around each other's shoulders, both smiling. After dinner, Harry went to the back door and looked out at the garden in the dusk. The roses were barely visible now, dark shapes against darker soil. The hedges were perfect lines against the fence. Everything ordered, everything controlled. Everything except the cupboard door, which still hung open in the hallway. Still unlatched after all these weeks. Still waiting. Harry turned away from the garden and went upstairs to his room, the smell of roses and earth still clinging to his clothes, his aunt's words still echoing in his mind. She never stayed still long enough to see anything grow. Harry lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering what his mother had been like when she lived in this house, wondering if she'd run through these rooms laughing, refusing to be still, refusing to be contained, wondering if that was why his aunt had built such careful walls around everything she touched. The house settled into night around him. Somewhere below, the cupboard door hung open in the dark hallway, and somewhere in the master bedroom, his aunt stood by her dresser, looking at a photograph of 2 girls who used to be sisters. Vernon left on Thursday morning with 2 suitcases and his briefcase, a work conference in Birmingham, 3 days of meetings and hotel dinners and networking with other drill salesmen. He'd mentioned it at breakfast earlier in the week, his voice gruff and final, as if daring anyone to comment. Petunia had nodded and said she'd pack his things. Harry watched from the kitchen window as Vernon loaded the car, his movements sharp and efficient. His uncle didn't look back at the house, didn't say goodbye, just got in the car and drove away, the engine fading down Privet Drive until the street was silent again. The house felt different immediately, larger, the air less compressed. Petunia stood at the sink, washing the breakfast dishes with slow, methodical movements. Dudley had gone back upstairs after eating. Harry sat at the kitchen table with his empty plate, uncertain whether to leave or stay. "The front garden needs weeding," Petunia said, without turning around. "Do that this morning." "Yes, Aunt Petunia." Harry went outside. The morning was warm already, promising another hot day. He knelt by the front flower beds and began pulling weeds, working his way along the border. Cars passed on the street. A delivery van stopped at a number 7. Everything normal, ordinary. Except the house behind him felt hollow, without Vernon's heavy presence filling it. Harry worked until mid-morning, then came inside to wash his hands. Petunia was in the living room, dusting. She'd opened the windows, and a breeze moved through the house, carrying the smell of cut grass from someone's lawn. "I'm making tea," she said. Not quite an invitation, just a statement. Harry dried his hands and stood uncertainly in the doorway. His aunt moved to the kitchen, filled the kettle, set it on the stove. She took down proper cups, not the everyday mugs, but the china ones she used only for guests, set them on saucers, got the good biscuits from the cupboard. The kettle whistled. Petunia made the tea with careful precision, warming the pot first, measuring the leaves. She poured 2 cups, added milk to both without asking, set them on the kitchen table. "Sit," she said. Harry sat. His aunt sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her. Teacup. Steam rose between them. The kitchen was quiet except for the ticking clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Petunia lifted her cup and took a small sip, set it back down carefully in its saucer. Her eyes were on the table, on the pale wood grain, on anything but Harry's face. The silence stretched. Harry picked up his own cup, the china delicate and warm in his hands. The tea was strong, slightly bitter. He added sugar and stirred, the spoon clinking softly against the cup. "Your mother," Petunia said suddenly. Harry's spoon stopped moving. He set it down carefully on the saucer, his heart suddenly loud in his ears. His aunt's face had gone very pale. Her hands tightened around her teacup, knuckles white. She opened her mouth, closed it. The muscle in her jaw jumped. "Your mother and I," she tried again. Her voice was thin, strained. "We weren't always—" The back door crashed open. Dudley burst in, red-faced and sweating, his friend Piers behind him. "Mum, we're starving," Dudley said loudly. "Can we have—" He stopped, looked at the table, at the china cups, at Harry sitting there with his aunt, having tea. "Oh," Dudley said. His face went uncertain. We were just—" Petunia stood abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor, harsh and loud. She turned to the counter, her back to all of them, her shoulders rigid. "There are sandwiches in the refrigerator," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. "Take them outside." "But Mum—" "Outside, Dudley." Dudley grabbed the sandwiches and left quickly, Piers trailing behind him. The back door closed. Through the window, Harry could see them in the garden, talking in low voices, glancing back at the house. Petunia stood at the counter, one hand pressed flat against the surface. She didn't move, didn't turn around. The silence in the kitchen felt suffocating. "Aunt Petunia," Harry said quietly, "leave it." "But you were saying—" "I said leave it." Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat. "Go upstairs. I'll call you if there are chores." Harry stood slowly, picked up his teacup to take it to the sink. His aunt's hand shot out and took it from him. "I'll do it," she said, still not looking at him. "Go." Harry went, paused in the doorway and looked back. His aunt stood at the sink, his teacup in her hands, staring down at it like it held something she couldn't name. He climbed the stairs slowly, his chest tight with something like disappointment, like grief. She'd been about to tell him something, about his mother, about their past, and the moment had shattered. In his room, Harry sat by the window and watched Dudley and Piers in the garden. They were kicking a football around, but without much enthusiasm. Dudley kept glancing at the house. The afternoon crawled by. Harry tried to read, but couldn't focus. Tried to write a letter to Ron, but didn't know what to say. The house was too quiet. Just Petunia downstairs somewhere, Dudley in the garden, and Harry in his room, all of them suspended in separate spaces. At dinner time, Petunia called them down. She'd made pasta with sauce from a jar, quick and simple. They ate at the kitchen table, just the three of them. Vernon's empty chair obvious in its absence. Petunia served Harry and Dudley equal portions. Neither of them commented. They ate in silence, forks scraping against plates, the kitchen window open to the evening air. When they finished, Dudley cleared his own plate without being asked, took it to the sink, stood there for a moment, his back to the table. "Mum," he said. His voice was uncertain. Are you okay?" Petunia's hands stilled on her own plate. "I'm fine, Dudley. It's just, you seem—" "I said I'm fine." Dudley nodded and left the kitchen. His footsteps went upstairs. His bedroom door closed. Harry started to stand. Petunia's voice stopped him. "Wait." He sat back down. His aunt remained very still, her eyes on her plate. The silence stretched between them, heavy and expectant. "When your mother and I were young," Petunia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "we shared a room. That second bedroom. Your bedroom now. We shared it." Harry's breath caught. He didn't move, didn't speak, afraid any sound would stop her. "She got the window side," Petunia continued. "Always the window side. She liked to look out at night, watch the stars. She said she was looking for magic even then, even before." She stopped, swallowed hard. "Before Hogwarts," Harry said quietly. Petunia's face tightened. "Yes." The word came out bitter, painful. She stood and went to the window, her back to Harry, her arms wrapped around herself. "When the letter came," she said, "I thought it was a joke, a cruel joke. But it wasn't. It was real. She was special, and I was—" Her voice broke. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting for control. Harry wanted to go to her, wanted to say something, but his aunt's posture forbade it, shoulders hunched, body turned away, every line of her screaming keep back. "I was so angry," Petunia whispered. "So angry for so long. And then she was gone, and I never got to—" She turned suddenly, her eyes wet, her face twisted with something raw and terrible. "You have her eyes," she said. "Every time I look at you, I see her eyes looking back at me, judging me, reminding me—" The front door opened. Vernon's voice boomed from the hallway. "Pet, I'm home. Conference ended early." Petunia's face went blank so fast it was like a curtain dropping. She wiped her eyes quickly, smoothed her skirt, straightened her shoulders. By the time Vernon appeared in the kitchen doorway, she looked exactly as she always did, composed, controlled, expressionless. "Vernon," she said. Her voice was steady. "I didn't expect you until tomorrow." "Bloody waste of time, the whole thing," Vernon said. He dropped his briefcase on the floor. "Driving all that way for meetings that could have been phone calls. I left after the afternoon session." "What's for dinner?" "We've already eaten. I can make you something." "Fine, I'll be in the living room." Vernon left. Petunia moved to the refrigerator, her movements mechanical. She didn't look at Harry, didn't acknowledge what had just happened, what she'd almost said. Harry stood slowly. "Aunt Petunia." "Go upstairs," she said to the inside of the refrigerator. "Now." Harry went, climbed the stairs on legs that felt unsteady, went to his room and closed the door and sat on his bed, his mind racing. You have her eyes. His aunt had looked at him and seen his mother, had been angry at his mother for being special, for being chosen, had lost her sister and never forgiven her and never stopped missing her all at once. Harry lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, at the water stain that looked like nothing at all. His aunt and his mother had shared this room. His mother had slept by the window, watching the stars, looking for magic, and Petunia had watched her sister watching the stars and felt left behind. That night, Harry couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the house. Vernon's snoring, Dudley's shifting in the room across the hall, the pipes settling. Around midnight, he heard crying, soft, muffled, coming from the master bedroom, his aunt, crying quietly into her pillow, while Vernon snored beside her, crying for a sister she'd lost twice, once to magic, once to death. Harry got up and went to his door, opened it slightly. The hallway was dark. He could see the line of light under his aunt and uncle's bedroom door, could hear the soft, controlled sounds of someone trying desperately not to be heard. He closed his door quietly and went back to bed, pulled the covers over his head and tried not to hear it, tried not to imagine his aunt's face twisted with grief, tried not to think about how she'd almost told him something true and important, and Vernon had come home and shattered it. In the morning, Petunia's face was composed again. She made breakfast without speaking. Vernon read his paper. Dudley ate quickly and disappeared. Harry finished his toast and eggs, watching his aunt's careful movements, the way she kept her eyes down, the way her hands shook slightly as she poured the orange juice. "The garden needs watering," she said to the table. "It'll be hot today. Water it early, before the sun gets high." "Yes, Aunt Petunia." She nodded once and left the kitchen. Harry heard her going upstairs, heard the bathroom door close, heard the shower start. He went outside with the hose and watered the garden slowly, methodically, the way his aunt had shown him. The roses, the hedges, the perfect lawn, everything in its place, everything controlled. But inside the house, his aunt stood in the shower and cried, where no one could hear her. And Harry understood, finally, that the cupboard door stayed open, not because his aunt had forgiven him. It stayed open because every time she looked at it, she saw the sister she'd loved and hated and lost, and she couldn't bear to lock that door again. The last week of summer arrived without ceremony. The days had taken on a sameness that felt both comfortable and suffocating. Breakfast at 8, chores assigned and completed, dinner at 6. Petunia moved through her routines with mechanical precision. Vernon retreated to his shed most evenings. Dudley stayed in his room, emerging only for meals. No one mentioned the almost conversation in the kitchen. No one mentioned anything at all. Harry worked in the garden most days. The weeding, the watering, the deadheading of roses. His hands had developed calluses. His skin had tanned. He knew now which plants needed shade, which needed full sun, which required careful attention, and which thrived on neglect. On Monday morning, he came downstairs to find his school trunk in the hallway. Someone, Petunia it must have been, had brought it down from his room. It sat by the front door, ready, waiting. The night bus would come on Sunday. 6 more days. Harry stood looking at the trunk for a long moment. Behind him, he heard his aunt in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of breakfast being prepared. He turned and went in. Petunia stood at the stove, her back to him. The radio played softly, that gardening program she sometimes listened to. Outside, Mr. Number 7 was already mowing his lawn, the drone of the mower cutting through the quiet morning. "Sit," Petunia said, without turning. "Breakfast is nearly ready." Harry sat. His aunt brought him eggs and toast and bacon, the portions he'd grown accustomed to over these strange weeks. Not minimal, not excessive, just enough. Fair. She sat across from him with her own tea, her hands wrapped around the cup. They ate in silence. The radio announcer discussed companion planting. The lawnmower droned on. When Harry finished, he took his plate to the sink, started to wash it. Petunia stood beside him, took the plate from his hands. "I'll do it," she said quietly. Harry dried his hands on the tea towel. His aunt washed the plate slowly, her movements careful. She rinsed it, set it in the drainer, stood there with her hands in the soapy water, staring out the window at her garden. "The roses will need deadheading again before winter," she said. "Weekly through September." Harry nodded, though she wasn't looking at him. "I won't be here." "No." Her jaw tightened. "You won't." She pulled her hands from the water, dried them on her apron, turned to face him finally, her expression carefully neutral. "You'll need to pack," she said. "Make sure you have everything. I won't be posting things you've forgotten." "Yes, Aunt Petunia." She nodded once and left the kitchen. Harry heard her going upstairs, her bedroom door closing. He spent the morning in his room, organizing his school things, his robes, his books, the photographs Hagrid had given him. He'd brought so little from Hogwarts, and yet it felt like so much. Evidence of another life, another world. At lunch, Petunia made sandwiches. They ate at the kitchen table, just the two of them. Vernon was at work. Dudley had gone to a friend's house. "Your trunk," Petunia said, not looking at him. "It's by the door. Check it. Make sure everything is in order." "I will." She nodded, took a small bite of her sandwich, set it down again, barely touched. "When does the bus come?" she asked. "Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. "Fine." She stood, taking her plate though she'd barely eaten. "I'll be in the garden if you need anything." Harry watched her go out the back door, her movements stiff and controlled. Through the window, he saw her kneel by the rose beds, her hands moving over the plants with careful attention. He finished his own lunch and went to check his trunk, opened it in the hallway, going through each item methodically. His robes were folded at the bottom, his books stacked neatly, his wand wrapped carefully in an old sock, tucked in the corner. The cupboard door hung open beside him. He glanced at it, that small dark space where he'd spent so many nights. The blanket was gone. The spiders had been cleaned out. It looked like just a cupboard now, just a space under the stairs for storing things no one needed anymore. Harry closed his trunk and stood, looked at the cupboard for a long moment, then reached out and pulled the door fully open. Looked inside one more time. Nothing. Just empty space. Just shadow and dust and the smell of old wood. He left it open and went upstairs. The days passed. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The routine continued. Breakfast, chores, dinner. Vernon barely acknowledged Harry's presence. Dudley nodded at him once in the hallway, an awkward gesture that might have been a goodbye or might have been nothing at all. Petunia gave Harry tasks in the garden, small things, trim this, water that, pull these weeds. They worked side by side in the warm afternoons, not speaking, the silence between them. No longer hostile, but not quite comfortable either. Something else. Something Harry had no name for. On Friday evening, after dinner, Petunia went upstairs earlier than usual. Harry heard her moving in the master bedroom, drawers opening and closing. When she came back down, she was carrying something wrapped in brown paper. She set it on the kitchen table, looked at it, looked at Harry. "For school," she said. Her voice was tight. "You'll need new socks. The ones you have are worn through." Harry stared at the package. His aunt had bought him socks, new socks, for school. "Thank you, Aunt Petunia," he said quietly. She nodded once, sharp and quick, and left the kitchen. Harry unwrapped the package slowly. Inside were 6 pairs of socks, plain and practical, school socks, the kind that would last. He carried them upstairs and packed them in his trunk, his hands shaking slightly. His aunt had noticed his socks were worn, had gone out and bought new ones, without being asked, without complaint. Saturday arrived, the last full day. Vernon made himself scarce, working in his shed on some project. Dudley stayed in his room. Petunia moved through the house, cleaning methodically, her face composed and expressionless. At dinner, she served roast beef, the good roast, the kind she usually made only for Vernon's work colleagues. She set equal portions on each plate. Harry, Dudley, Vernon, all the same. Vernon noticed. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. He looked at his wife, his face reddening. Petunia met his gaze steadily, her expression unchanging. "It's what we had," she said flatly. "Everyone gets what's there." Vernon's mustache twitched. He looked at Harry's plate, back to his own. Then he continued eating, his jaw working hard, chewing each bite with aggressive precision. After dinner, Vernon retreated to the living room. Dudley mumbled something about packing and went upstairs. Harry started clearing the table. Petunia stopped him. "Leave it," she said. "Go, finish your packing. The bus comes early." Harry nodded, but he paused in the doorway, looking back at his aunt. She stood at the sink, her hands braced against the counter, her head bowed. "Aunt Petunia," he said. She didn't turn around. "What?" Harry wanted to say something. "Thank you. I understand. I'm sorry." But none of it seemed right. None of it seemed enough. "Nothing," he said finally. "Good night." She nodded without turning. "Good night." Harry went upstairs and finished packing, double-checked everything. His trunk was ready, his school things organized. Hedwig preened herself on her perch, sensing the change coming. That night, Harry lay awake listening to the house settle. Tomorrow he'd leave. Tomorrow the night bus would take him away from Privet Drive, back to Hogwarts, back to the world where he belonged. And his aunt would stay here, in this house, with Vernon and Dudley and her perfect garden and the photograph she kept on her dresser, with the sister she'd lost twice and the nephew she couldn't look at without seeing those same green eyes looking back. Sometime after midnight, Harry heard footsteps in the hallway, soft and careful. They paused outside his door, then moved on, went downstairs. Harry got up and went to his door, opened it silently. Petunia stood at the bottom of the stairs, in her dressing gown, her hair unpinned. She was looking at the cupboard under the stairs. Harry watched as his aunt reached out and touched the open door. Her fingers traced the frame, the way they'd traced the crack in the skirting board, where his mother had left a mark all those years ago. She stood there for a long moment, her hand on the door. Then she pulled it closed. Not locked, just closed. The latch clicked softly into place. Then she opened it again, let it swing back to where it had been for weeks now, hanging loose, unlatched. She stood looking at it. Then she turned and climbed the stairs, her face wet with tears she didn't bother to hide. She passed Harry's doorway without seeing him, went to her own room, closed the door. Harry went back to bed, lay there staring at the ceiling until the sky began to lighten. In the morning, the house was quiet. Harry came downstairs with his trunk, bumping it carefully down the steps. The cupboard door hung open exactly as it had been for weeks now. Petunia was in the kitchen, already dressed. She'd made breakfast, eggs and toast. She set a plate in front of him without speaking. Vernon appeared, grunting acknowledgement. Dudley came down last, his hair sticking up, still in his pajamas. They ate. The clock ticked. Outside, the street was quiet, waiting. At 5 minutes to 10, Harry heard the distant roar of the night bus. He stood. Petunia stood too. "I'll get your trunk," she said. Together, they carried it to the front door. The bus was visible now, purple and triple-decked, careening down Privet Drive. It screeched to a halt in front of number 4. Harry picked up Hedwig's cage. His aunt held the door open, her hand tight on the handle. The bus conductor jumped out. "Hogwarts Express pickup?" "Yes," Harry said. He started to move his trunk toward the door. Petunia's hand on his arm stopped him. He turned. His aunt was looking at him, really looking at him, her face pale and strained. "Be careful," she said. Her voice was barely audible. Harry stared at her. His aunt's hand trembled slightly on his arm, then dropped. "Yes, Aunt Petunia," he said softly. She nodded, stepped back. Let him take his trunk out to the bus. Harry loaded his things, climbed aboard. Through the window, he could see Petunia standing in the doorway, not hiding, not pretending, just standing there, watching. Vernon appeared behind her, already retreating inside, Dudley visible in the hallway, half hidden. But Petunia stayed in the doorway. The bus started up. Harry sat by the window, looking back at number 4, at his aunt's silhouette in the doorway, at the house where he'd spent every summer of his life. Petunia raised her hand, not quite a wave, just a small gesture, an acknowledgement. Harry lifted his own hand in response. Then the bus lurched forward, and Privet Drive vanished behind them. Harry sat back in his seat, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Behind him, in that ordinary house on that ordinary street, his aunt would be closing the front door, going back to her kitchen, making tea, looking out at her garden. and the cupboard door would stay open. Not because anything was forgiven, not because anything was fixed, but because Petunia Dursley had looked at that small, dark space where she'd locked her sister's son away and decided she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't lock him away, couldn't look away, couldn't pretend he was nothing. It wasn't love. It wasn't acceptance. It was barely kindness, but it was something. Some small crack in the rigid walls his aunt had built around herself and her life and her careful, controlled world. The cupboard door would stay open. And that, Harry thought, as the bus carried him toward King's Cross, toward Hogwarts, toward home. That would have to be enough.